Without mistakes and failure, you don't grow. They're not expecting you to just walk around happy-go-lucky in life as if it's this butterfly everywhere and flowers and nothing goes wrong. In fact, it is a warrior that gets hit by arrows and falls on his knees and he's in pain and agony. But the true warrior is the one who gets up and roars like a lion.
Good afternoon, good day, good evening. I don't know what time you're listening or where you're listening from. It's your boy, your host, NaRon Tillman, and you are with me for another episode of Walk in Victory. Speaking of victory, walk.
Warning, this is a public service announcement. The Walk in Victory podcast is where we have conversations purposed to evolve lives. You may not want to evolve. Then tune into another bleeping podcast. Everyone else, enjoy the show. And here's our host.
Good afternoon, good day. I don't know what time you're listening or where you're listening from, but it's your boy, your host, NaRon Tillman, and you are with me for another exciting episode of Walk in Victory. Speaking of victory walks, there was a part of my life when I got heavy into philosophy, studies, experience, and I learned a lot about human life cycles. I learned a lot about one of my favorite philosophers, the Greek time, which was a high thinking time. And you would think that because we have so much technology, that this would seem as if we're living in a high thinking time. We're really not. In terms of the thinking, we've seen a decrease in thinking over the last set of time. And it's sad because in order to be successful, you have to be a thinker. However, philosophies do change. And one of the things that comes to mind for me is there was a philosophy of classes where people could not climb up a ladder. So if you were born into a family of kings, then you were in line to be king. If you were born into a family of slaves, and that word slave at that time was worker. It wasn't the way that we view slavery. And a lot of times people are like, oh, the Bible says slaves be obedient to the master. That word, and this is why philosophy is fascinating, because the word slave, like any other word, evolved over the course of time. The word slave meant someone who's working for someone else. And the philosophy behind it was if you are hired to do a job and the person that hired you wasn't watching, do the job anyway. If you interpret it from the lens of an American worldview of what slavery was to America, then you look at that and say, oh no, the slaves in those times, if the keeper of the house didn't have male children, the slave inherited everything. So it's totally different type of thing. But philosophy within itself is doable because one looks at the time. It looks at the time where we are, and it begins to interpret the time with a lens at what happened before, but not necessarily projecting for the future. Well, we see there's beginning to be a transformation in Aristotle at the end of this life was one who had to say you were born in the family of kings, then you can only ascribe to be a king. If you're born into the family of paupers, you can only be a pauper. And only paupers stole. So if something went missing in someone's house, they would look at the person that was less affluent. And before he passed, which his philosophies in this case were not heavily publicized because of all of the other things that was going on. But he recanted. And he said humans, regardless of how much they have or how little they have, or do whatever they feel that they can get away with. That started to usher in a new way of thinking that a person cannot necessarily be a king, but ascribe to be. And in our case, a guy can come from a project and ascribe to be an entrepreneur, or have a family that was non-affluent or didn't understand money and ascribe to money. But now what happens in neuroscience, which is the new philosophy of our time, we hear these words imposter syndromes. So there has to be a blend of these old philosophies and these new philosophies because a man will pull himself up, or the female can pull herself up by bootstraps and become something that none of us ascribe them to become. And when it closes the door, they feel as if they're reacting. Aristotle and those didn't take into account, which neuroscience and philosophical groups are trying to account for, is that the emotion of the man. You can measure the brain waves, you can measure all of those things, but you can't measure the emotions. You can measure why some players for 45 minutes, it was 48 minutes, but for 45 minutes they hit guys. 3 minutes left, they miss all the free throws. Something inside their heart. Or the guy sucks for 43 minutes. Not suck. He's good enough to be in the team. He's good enough to do his part. But then the pressure, the more attentive they become. We waffle at that. We don't quite understand it. And that's not just in sports. That's not just in philosophy. That's in every industry where you have some people that strive when the pressure hits. Some people are writing articles and doing podcasts every day about the recession and pulling out the hair and the stock market went down. And they coming up with all these excuses to lose while other people are thinking, calm down. Calm down. Calm down. So listen, we're going to see Kamran, CEO of Rise of Giants, because he is going to help enlighten us even more on this topic. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for having me, Ro.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. If you don't mind telling our audience a little bit about yourself, why did I go on this big rant about mindset, philosophy, and all those things?
No, I'm really glad that you opened like that, because to me, my whole life has been in search of what does victory, as you mentioned, which is the name of your podcast, and success really means. It means so many different things to people. And let me just give a little example of success, and not how do you succeed, because there's 10,000 ways people always talk about how you succeed. And we all know that there is some basics to every one of them, whether it's effort or planning or strategy or whatever. But are you really successful if you are very financially well off, but then your relationship is miserable? Are you very successful if your relationship is great, you don't have enough money to pay your bills? Are you really successful if your mental fitness, I don't mean health, or physical fitness is just dragging back, but then you have money and you have great relationships, but you are 5 inches away from a mental breakdown or a heart attack? And of course, the purpose of life, and I don't mean the spirituality or religion, there's nothing wrong with any of those, it's just when you get up in the morning, what is your purpose of life? Do you just get up because, you have to just get up, or do you jump out of bed because there is the passion? There is that feeling inside you that you want to go ahead and achieve. I think there is a balance that needs to be created for one to be really called successful. And then in each one of these areas, if you have reached your expectations, you don't have to be the richest person in the world. You don't have to have the greatest relationship in the world, or have the greatest purpose in life, but just a balance that gives you well-being and you feel good. And if you have achieved all of that, then you have achieved your victory. Now, that formula can be applied in any area of life. Even you mentioned sports. You have to have good relationship with your team players, with your coach, with other people. You have to have a purpose to go in there, because if you're miserable, you don't want to play. All these different things has to be put into place. So my life journey started from a very young age. I was a seeker and I wanted to find out what does all this thing mean. So I took 2 career paths. One was business, one was academic. On the academic side, I became a professor of business, MBA. In a major school, I became a professor of Eastern philosophy. Of course, studied Western philosophy first before I went to Eastern philosophy. Tried to understand what this great thinker that you mentioned to, what they were doing. And then on the business side, I became a CEO of my own company, something very bizarre. People always say, how did you get into that? That's another story. I started a company very, very early on in the early 80s, brought a team of people together, and it was in that company that I invented pepper spray. And I have all the patents on it. And from there, I was instrumental in introducing it worldwide, wherever it is. Then I moved on to other companies, and I was in charge of those companies and this and that and the other. But at the same time, I started advising major brands. I was with some of the most senior executives at Apple for several decades, trying to advise them in leadership, innovation thinking, creative thinking, all of which, by the way, was coming from a source, which I want to get into right now, which was also my personal interest. For 50 years, I was involved heavily in location in India, not only researching, but practicing yoga and meditation under some of the greatest that are out there. I don't mean the YouTube gurus, the real ones that were really advising me. Some of them, their lineage goes back 800-900 years. Then I was also very much involved in the classical Japanese warrior arts, the samurais and this and that and the other, again, since the age of 11. So I have been involved in that. So I put all this thing together. The reason why is because I found out something really fascinating, is that I found, for whatever reason, throughout all these cultures, the warrior, there is a warrior, a metaphor there. And the warrior, we're not talking about the killer, the savage, the one who goes and destroys villages, but the concept of an enlightened warrior, somebody who's wise warrior, who has learned things in life, is just all over the place. And the reason in every culture, in every place throughout history, it happens to be that India, by the way, as everybody thinks about China, actually India, more than China, has been the one who has documented it. And if you look at it, actually, the Chinese Kung Fu and all these things started because of a travel of an Indian monk called Bodhidharma long ago to China, 500 years after the coming of the Buddha in India. So when you look at all this different metaphor of the warrior, and the warrior is the one who is, the option of failure is not there. And why is the warrior archetype there? Because the young warrior goes on a journey. And why? Because life is a journey. And this has to go through all these difficulties. We can even study Hercules, for example. He went through all these obstacles of Hercules to achieve that. So the old metaphors going there, the mythology. But the warrior goes on this journey called the heroic journey. And as he's going through this heroic journey, he faces two enemies. One is an external enemy, which is the adversaries and all that, and in fact, natures and everything else that life throws at you. The other one is the battle within the mind of the warrior. And all of the desires, addictions, temptations, everything else, fears, loneliness, everything else that normal humans today have to go through. So he has to conquer those. He has to go through those things in order to reach his journey. And he goes through all these gates. Imagine caves that he has to go in stories and myth to be able to come and learn and go to the other side. At all time, there is this the wise warrior who's advising him in these stories to go around. Why, again, the metaphor of the warrior is so important? It is important because he is going through a heroic journey. He is going through the challenges. Remember life, remember business, remember relationship. All of these things apply to this parallel because that's what the stories are about. But then as he conquers, he becomes a catalyst. He finishes his journey and he comes back to his village. And because of him, now the village is uplifted. He becomes a giant leader. He becomes an example to other people, example of wisdom. I have been there. I can help you. Then they sit around the fire and he tells his stories and other people can learn from it. And I look at that, when I look at all these things, I see that it's very interesting because some areas that you may never think about, such as, for example, yoga. Everybody thinks about yoga as a kind of a passive thing and you just practice your thing. The founder of yoga was a warrior, Lord Shiva himself. And his son, Kartikeya, was the Lord of War. Why? Again, because you have to face challenges in life and you have to go through all these things. So as I'm studying all that and I'm looking all that and I'm bringing my business background, academic background, my warrior martial art background, and all of this together, I find that I haven't come up with something new. It's just that nobody has put this together to make it available. So I decided to come up with this riseofgiants.com website to put all these things, which is all free program, to put all these things for people out there because people are really struggling and they need to know where they are. And then you mentioned that young kid in the project. That young kid in the project could be the leader of the world, but he needs a map. He needs a template. He needs a direction. He needs to believe in himself. Who more than a warrior was to believe in himself? You look at, for example, the stories of Muhammad Ali. You know, one of some of the greatest saying that Ali said was that the fight is over in the ring before I even go dance under those lights. Why is he saying that? Is that self-development? Is that self-improvement? He knows before he even enters the ring that he is the best because he has overcome himself. He has won the battle within. And so I think this metaphor is so important for today's world. Kids are There is suicide. There is addiction. There is this. Adults are lonely. They're purposeless. They don't know where they're going. They hate their jobs. And there's another thing to be said about this. Where do you find a more complicated, comprehensive approach to life than the warrior? And let me explain why. You may say, what does finances got to do with it? Warriors did obviously not know more than our top PhD economists today. But guess what? They actually invented the concept of banking. Most people don't know that. The Knights Templars, all right, in the Middle Ages, they were the ones who actually invented banking because people were just going to go to Jerusalem and all that, and they had to leave their belongings and everything and savings and their money with somebody, and they trusted these monk warriors who were supposed to be honorable and ethical to keep their money and saving. They came up with such a sophisticated banking system that the King of France got very upset at them because basically he owed them so much debt that they didn't know what to do. So he goes back behind their back and starts influencing the Pope, telling them that these guys have turned sour, which they didn't. And we need to get rid of them. So they, on a one day in history, the French, under the ruler of the king, attacked all the Knights Templar in France, and they killed every one of them. And that day actually has become the interesting thing in history, and we never talk about it, we never think about it. It was the famous Friday the 13th. That was on that day that they killed all the Templars because of banking system.
Yeah, it's funny that you said it because there's a show out called The Last Samurai. And they stood themselves, but they hold the warrior. And now that you're giving me more of a backdrop, I understand the Roman Church's influence in saying, hey, they're still in there doing a dude would point the finger and creating whispers. And that lead his ears and it caused a rift. Even though one of the great attributes of a warrior is loyalty. And I studied yoga with Eddie Stewart, who practiced in India, here in the States, and Ashtanga style of yoga. And again, going into it, because I teach also, but going into it was more about, and then as we start to develop and actually start to grow and start to get the hang of it, you see the connector between not the physical thing that yoga does to the body, but what it does internally.
It's so amazing. It's so amazing you mentioned that, because if the movie Last Samurai, which I enjoyed and I saw at the same thing, they talk about continuously about the Bushido code, which the Japanese samurai created in the Tokugawa period of Japan under Tokugawa Ieyasu, the shogun. And the idea was that before that, they were just savages. They had no rules of law. They could just go in the village. They didn't like a villager, and then that's it. They would kill him. And they had to create this Bushido code to live with, which we today call values and beliefs and ethical behavior. The reason I mention this, because you brought yoga up, which is fantastic. You just put your hand on it. Most people in Ashtanga yoga, which means the 8-step yoga, or the Raja yoga as they call it, or the royal yoga, one of the most ancient system of yoga, they don't really think about the fact that yoga doesn't start with postures and breathing and this. It starts with yamas and niyamas. And niyamas are the values of yoga. Don't steal. Don't do this. Don't do that. It's almost like their 10 commandment. Why? Because, again, let's go back to the project. Let's go back to the everyday kids that they go to college. They go to, not college, elementary school and all that. You can't just say, hey, this one is rotten from the core from the beginning. No. If you don't teach people from the beginning what values they have to live by, what is the map of life, when they become leader, what do you expect them to do? They're going to be rotten characters. They're not going to be the people that you can trust, you can believe, you can have, because it's things that has to be instilled in them throughout life. So I really am glad that you brought that example up.
And I want to ask you a question right there, because this is leading to a deeper question. So when you have leaders, no one goes into leadership saying, oh, I'm going to go and I'm going to F up. Go in thinking that we're going to change the world. But we may still have things that we've never dealt with our inner world. The spiral dynamics talks about the level of personality types, but we all have an inner warrior within us. And some of us never with an inner warrior. So you might not start off stealing, using that as an example, but now you're raising all this money and you're going through whatever your reason is. You say, oh, I'll put it back. And it may start off something small, and then you lean back into who you were because you have no system to help you to train or to continue to tame that war that may have been laying dormant inside of you, whether it's alcohol addiction, drug addiction, or whatever other things that may entice someone who gets to a level of influence, right? Because the higher we become in influence, the lower sometimes we become in morale, and we might dabble in something. Oh, just take a drink to get the edge off, and I'm dependent on the drink. How do you navigate that, especially in a Western culture? Mostly everything the Western culture, whether it's religion, yoga, mindfulness, or whatever, is more external first than internal. The external benefits solidifies the internal benefits. What do you say when you started to study the Eastern philosophies? And the Eastern philosophies look at the internal that really produces the fruit from the external and for the external.
And I think that's a great question. And I think the thing that we have to understand is that when you really study these deep philosophies and you go the enlightened philosophies and you go deep into it, you come to the conclusion that it is the internal that drives the external. There is no difference between the two. End of the story. And there is, on one hand, on a bigger way of looking at life, I wished that our education system and all of these things would teach young people from beginning what it is to do. Even at MBA level, which I'm a professor of, nobody talks about leadership. Very few schools actually have courses on leadership, which is ridiculous. You're teaching MBAs, management, and Masters of Business Administration. They're getting their MBA, they're coming out there, and they don't even know how to lead. So it's important that we instill these things. Now, when you have a philosophy of life, again, I repeat, I'm not talking about spirituality or religion. It's how life works. That among really wise people throughout history, they had a philosophy of life. When you have a philosophy of life, which has value system and all that, you stick to that because it is more important to you mentally to be fit, physically to be fit, healthy, than go, there's nothing wrong about drinking, but to go ahead and get wasted. You follow a philosophy. You don't want to lose that control in your life. So this has to be instilled in people from young age. And then again, you brought addiction. It's not foreign to, there is actually one of those caves, those gates that I mentioned to you for warriors that have to go through into a heroic journey is called the battle within. And the ladder of thorns, they're just going up in this ladder, which is full of thorns, and you just keep getting cut as you're going up. And they teach you about the concept of failure and mistake and how do you deal with regrets. And when you don't have these things, when you don't have this philosophy, you don't have this mechanism. So what do? The first thing you do is pleasure seeking to try to gratify yourself because you're empty. And when you're empty, what do? The first thing you do is you want immediate gratification. But when there is something else in there that is so bright, is so full of light, is so hopeful, that gives you joy, gives you love, gives you passion to do something, you have no time for any of that. You have no space for any of that because you're full. So that fullness has not been thought. And I'm trying to bring that out. And people you can't live by just looking at the one sentence that motivates you, inspires you. You need something much deeper, something of substance that you live by, that becomes your personality, that becomes your character. And recognize that.
Early on in my preaching ministry, I started preaching when I was 24, these 50, well, it was this year in September. I was introduced into what known as like these creeds. And the creeds were ways of living. And most churches don't really have these creeds that they live. Westminster's Confession and their creeds were in depth and long because they were actually philosophies. And one of the creeds, one of the tenets within in their confession of faith was eternal security. And because they said that a man's journey will take them through periods where they may deny God, with curse, where they may drink. They may do all the things that the belief is telling them they should not do. However, this is a part of the healing experience, and this is how we come out. And how do we know if we're really in fellowship with the Creator or with God? Then we will eventually come out of that season in our lives. And we're not saying that you won't hurt anybody. We're not saying that you won't lose. They're saying, but this is what you have to understand. And it was during these life lessons leaning into a young woman, a young man's life before they even started on the journey. Because the worst thing to do, veering towards like even a religious context, is to feel as if you failed the God or whatever you're hired. And then, oh my God, he can't get me as no, if we don't have this vastness of who we are as humans. So nobody's preparing you for a journey, and you go through something, you have a mishap, you do something wrong, you lash out, you don't come home at night, whatever it is your journey takes you on. It gets worse when you don't have anything to say, okay, my teacher told me that this might happen. But because we all go in there thinking we're expected to be perfect. And the question is, expectations of perfection, living in the media, a social media context, where if a person, let's say, does something wrong, then the whole world shames, and everybody knows, and then you don't even have a chance to really simulate through the journey because everyone is piling like, what do you say as the rise of the giant about this time and how people bastardize or pile on when people are actually living through a personal journey?
I think the most important part is that, first of all, let's start with the choice concept, and then we talk about today's giants, the enlightened giants, the warrior giants. They say that we are free to fall or rise as giants. So that's a choice. Okay, so you can basically destroy your life or just come up. That's that. Now, they also introduced the concept of mistakes and failure, because without mistakes and failure, you don't grow. They're not expecting you to just walk around happy-go-lucky in life as if it's this butterfly everywhere and flowers and nothing goes wrong. In fact, it is a warrior that gets hit by arrows and falls on his knees and he's in pain and agony. But the true warrior is the one who gets up and roars like a lion. There is a saying in Japan among the samurais called Nanakorobi Aoki, which means 7 times down, 8 times up. What does this say? That says you are going to fall, but you're going to learn from your falls. Albert Einstein, you have that, the great saying, used to say that the person who has never made a mistake never lived. So we have to make mistakes. We have to learn from it. But having a wise, enlightened approach to life that can tell us, we've done this before. We know what it means to fall. Don't just do it on your own. There is a way to follow. There is a way to think about this. That's that. Now comes to what you mentioned today, social media, different things attacking you, media just making you feel this way. But there's two sides to that. One side is how you feel, all right? A warrior does not get at all attached to that. It doesn't hurt them. What? Because they've reached a state of equanimity, which means the mind is under control. They see anything like that happens just as waves in consciousness of the mind. I want to bring something about force right here, which is very interesting. Consciousness of the mind. So the same way that there is ripples on a body of a water, and it comes, but it goes back to the water. Those ripples are made of water. The same way thoughts and emotions are just waves and movement, disturbances in consciousness, of individual consciousness of us. So they look at it, they just observe it, and they just witness it. Bringing yoga into it, in yoga it's called witness consciousness or sakshi. So you are basically witnessing this concept and not getting pulled into it. All right? Now before we go again to the media, the other side of it, let me just talk about the concept of force. The heroic journey was such an important part that actually George Lucas got so influenced by the concept of heroic journey because of Professor Joseph Campbell that he made the whole Star Wars saga based on the heroic journey. So this is not something new. The ones who know, they know. Now, when it comes to the force concept, in Star Wars, a lot of concepts, he comes out and says, the force be with you. I just want to use a couple of those words because they're interesting. Actually, in the warrior tradition, they talk about the fact that eventually the young warrior comes to recognize that his own individual consciousness is the most powerful force, and the force is with him. That means your consciousness, realize you have to manage the mind, not eliminate it. Manage them with this force. If you don't know how to manage it, it pulls you everywhere. They give the example of a horse that is wild, and you're sitting there, and you have to hold the rein of this horse tight. Otherwise, the horse will take you wherever he wants to. So they give you that example from a warrior point of view. So that's there. Just something anecdotal to say something interesting. You have the Jedis in the warrior concept. Ancient India, you have the Jeti warriors, which are enlightened and powerful. They said mythologically, of course, they exaggerate. They had the power of an elephant and things like that. And wise, whatever, and enlightened. Now, coming back to the other side of the coin of social media. When you make mistake, there are two ways to do it. Either you prevent it, and that's why we're here, the rise of giants. Let's learn so that we don't make those kind of mistakes so that social media brings us completely down. All right? Let's be in control. Let's manage that. Or hits the fan, okay? And when it hits the fan, a warrior, who better than a warrior falls from the horse? What are you going to do? Sit down. The two choices you have. Sit down and feel sorry for yourself and cry for 15 days and don't eat and drink until you just pass out. Or you're going to have to go chase the horse and jump back on it and go on and go to another village and live a new life so that those things don't affect you. So things happens in life, end of the story. But don't give an excuse. Don't give a reason for you to be pulled down. Follow a philosophy of life. Follow the mental fitness. Again, I repeat, it's not health. Physical fitness in life. So you have the energy. Follow a philosophy of life. Pay attention to relationships. Relationships are not perfect. There is no road without an accident, no sky without a thunder. These are the words of the warriors. So what do you do with your relationship? Just they give an example of a garden. What do you do in a garden? You will like it or not, weeds grow. So go pull the weeds out. All right? Don't let the weeds keep growing because then you're going to have to work really hard. And they may throw you out of the garden. So pull the weeds out. And what else do you do with a garden? You nurture it. You fertilize it. Give love to your people. Say, I am sorry. Give them a hug. Love them. That's not because the garden is perfect, but because you come from the point of view of perfection. You want to be perfect in your giving of relationship. When it comes to finances, you know what? You can just ignore it until your teeth start abscessing and you have to go pull it. Or beforehand, pay attention to it. Oh, no, I'm not going to pay the money. I'm not going to pay. No, you have to pay the money. You have to do something with these teeth. There's a problem here. You have to pay attention. And if you're living beyond your means, you're not listening to that voice inside, which is your conscious. Remember, the consciousness is the strongest force. You're not listening and you're screwing your life up. And then you're spending money on things you shouldn't be doing. So being in control, doing all of that, learning about things, strategy and tactics is something that comes from the warriors. If you don't use the right strategy in your finances, in your business, and you know what? It's not going to work. And none of us are as intelligent as anybody else. We all learn from each other. The greatest giant. I mentioned Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali just didn't come out by himself and start boxing. He had great coaches. He had great people who learned from. And that's why he became the greatest. And anybody like that you talk to, they always says, I stand on the shoulder of giants. That means I was on somebody else's shoulder before I became great. So we need to pay attention to our finances. We need to pay attention to our relationship. We need to pay attention. We can, we are in a boat in life. And I'm going to conclude with that based on your question. It's like being on a river. And that's exactly another example of the warriors, the giants. They said you're on a boat on a river, and a river that is turbulent and is going down. All right? You have two choices. Take control or let the water take you anywhere else. But they also come up with a third example. They said, come to the shore, stop, pause, reflect, strategize, and decide next plan of action and attack. So you have a choice to stop. And they give the example of the eye of the hurricane. They said the hurricane is vicious, is huge, is ominous, is black, is just ridiculous the way it's going. And it's going to destroy everything. But when you look in the center of it, it's completely silent. Yeah. So we have a choice to enter to that eye. We have a choice to come out of the river. So that's my answer to the media and to everything else that destroys you. Stop, re-strategize, replan, rethink. Don't jump with both feet.
I cannot let you go without asking you this question. And then this is my last one. What was going on with pepper spray?
It's very interesting. It's both, fascinating, interesting question. And I'm more than happy to get into it, but not in too much detail. Two things happened. One was a personal thing, incident that moved me in that direction. The other one was basically research in my academic area. Let me give you the personal one. My wife and I were overseas. We were shopping, and somebody followed my wife with a knife and attacked her. And thank God I was there to defend. But then I sat down and thought about it. How's she going to defend herself when I'm not around? So the whole concept didn't just came to me right there. But then as I came to United States, fascinating, you just brought that up. Let's bring it up. They beat the hell out of Rodney King. Okay. And now at this time, the Attorney General comes out and says, hey, you know what? We need non-lethal weapons. We can't just use baton and gun. And we can see how much our police culture has produced. And I go as an expert in court all the time for this thing. And it hasn't really developed much. In fact, it's becoming more military-like. And so what happens at that point is that they're requesting that. So my idea suddenly came out, again, from my Japanese areas of warrior tradition, because I was so deep into it, both academically and practitioner. And I realized there's a thing called Metsubishi, which is what the Japanese in close quarter samurai used. And it was a little box, almost like a matchbox, that they put powdered pepper in it, and it had a little hole in it, and you would blow that into the opponent's face when you were in his close quarter because you couldn't pull your sword out. It gave you the time to create the distance. So I took that concept, I brought scientists because I had business background, and I brought research and developers. We had a very small company at that time, and we started doing serious study. And let me just tell you about the serious study. Aspirin, can be taken from a bark of a tree, but you can't eat the bark of a tree. You have to separate it. You have to go to a pharmaceutical process. So we took a pharmaceutical process. So you had sprays on the market then, like dog repellents, this, that, the other, but they were not weaponized. What I mean by weaponized, you couldn't use it in cold. They would freeze. Every time you pull the trigger, it has to work. You can't just say sometimes it doesn't. And it had to be reliable. So we had to go through a very sophisticated pharmaceutical engineering process of developing the trigger, the actuator, the spray pattern, everything else to actually make something that people can rely on. And then that company became big enough that it went to 47 countries around the world. And I personally started writing every manual for every federal agencies, how to properly use pepper spray, not abuse it, because a lot of people do, even in federal agencies, prisons and everything else. And so how do you properly use it? How do they certify it? So this is really the drive behind the two around the personal experience I had and the martial art warrior concept that gave me, my business came, my academic came, and scientists and everything else. And that's how it got developed.
For everybody, I told you, sit your at the feet of the masters. Listen, if you are listening to me, my work, the thing that got me started, the thing that we've done from our companies, working with youth and young adults, training mindfulness and best yoga practices using the Ashtanga yoga base, just a systematic base. So every time we come together, we do the same movements, the same motions. The body just expands, and the body doesn't expand because we're doing the motions. The body expands because the mind is changing. And as the mind becomes more flexible, the body becomes more flexible. We're taking our whole life lessons and we're starting to do some coaching. We're changing our website. I just want to let you all know now. So as we begin to talk about that, you can, if you're interested in doing do coaching online, yoga classes with us, we will have those things available for you, and we can help from wherever you are in the world because technology has allowed us to do that. You are interested in taking these courses to learn how to rise your journey. The link is in the description. There's a landing page on our website where you can go. And as you heard the man say that these courses, he's giving away because he has passion. I can't give away my courses. Because he has a passion to ensure that our people learn these life lessons that are invaluable and are not ancient and that are proven. So go on and take advantage of this. And don't be left out and developing your inner warrior. Now, finally, we don't have to shoot for Venmos, Cash Apps, for any of those things. But what we do ask is that you support our guests. One, that you like and that you subscribe. And if you're listening on a platform where you can leave a review, that you leave a review. Your reviews go a long way in getting other people to hear what it is that we're talking about. We don't want these conversations to go unheard. We want it to be on the outside of the tornado, not the silence and the gifts. Enjoy the rest of your day. Peace.
So I really want to thank you for this. And if anybody wants to reach me, I'm at riseofgiants with an s.com, and more than happy to be in touch with anybody. As I mentioned, programs are free, and keep the great work you yourself. And I'm here to support anybody who's doing this kind of work. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. And there you have it, everybody. That's one thing you got to do. Enjoy your day.